And I certainly went into it in 1980 thinking, this is not going to last long, because it ends. There's pools of oil, you exploit that oil, and it shrinks, and then it finishes.
If nothing is in place, we go down the route of the same thing repeating itself, just like it did with the mining industry and the fishing industry. It'd be nice to have learnt from the past.
There's highs and lows, but this time it feels different to anything that's happened.
This is the midnight, let no star delude us, dawn is very far. This is the tempest, long foretold, slow to make head, but sure to hold. Stand by the lull, twixt blast and blast, signals the storm is near, not past.
It's a surreal place, offshore, like. And I mean, I've been on platforms where the oil's coming up that fast from the ground that it's actually roaring.
It's a harsh industry. Like the weather in the North Sea is like really unforgiving. When you're out there, if you're in the middle of a storm and something goes wrong, it's not the easiest thing to get like a Coast Guard helicopter to come and save the day.
I've been on an oil rig when it's been getting hit by 22-metre waves in the North Sea. That's 60-foot waves in the middle of the night, and we're all standing in the corridor in our underpants because the oil rig's going over like that and it's coming back. It's moving about 2.5 metres. It's the only time I've ever been afraid, to be honest.
It's just vast. There's so many moving parts. There's a lot of drive around safety because you are working in such a dangerous industry. I've heard some of the old guys say it's almost like you are literally working on a floating bomb. You tend to do a 3-week trip, and during that time you work 12 hours on, 12 hours off. It's almost like going in a time capsule. You put your home life on hold for 3 weeks at a time, and then you go to work and you kind of just have to have everything at home straight so that you can focus on your work.
You're a person out there, and then when you come home you're a different person. I mean, that brings stress to you as well, because you've got to sort of put a front up. So I've now been offshore for 18 years. Out Aberdeen, I've been Azerbaijan, I've been to places all over the world, They treat you like a king. Everything was covered, your training was covered. But now, you've just, for some reason, they've seemed to devalue the workforce. It's only been within the last 4 or 5 years that it's actually stopped. And I don't understand why, because the oil's still there. These contracting companies are still making the same money, but it's the workforce just aren't seeing it. It's the standards for the workforce has just plummeted. There's 27,000 people who work offshore in Britain, but nobody knows anything about it. People didn't realise that every time you switch the light switch on, that's us. The minute you fill your car, that's me. The minute you turn your gas on, that's me.
Everything comes down to climate change. That's all he watches. Planet programs, everything to do with animals, extinction, stuff like that.
It does genuinely scare me, to be honest, to think what are things going to look like in 30 years' time with rising sea levels, all sorts of information that suggests that we might lose a lot of the coastline. Yeah, I think about it all the time. It's quite scary, really.
It should be shut down, but it should be done in a way which serves as the model for the rest of the world. If we cut it off, I think we'd we'd be doing an injustice to the whole climate change debate.
At first, when I said that I was moving into the oil and gas industry, a few of my friends kind of like looked at me, gone out, and they said like, do you not care about the environment and things like that? And what I've learned in quite a short time working offshore is that we're basically providing like a global energy demand, and most people depend on goods to come by sea, and for goods to come by sea to like an island nation like the UK, at the moment you need to burn heavy fuel oil, which is a byproduct of the oil and gas industry.
Because you need oil for everything. You need oil for plastics, your camera's made of oil. Do you know what I mean? It's not just petrol and stuff in your car. Oil is, you're never getting away from it. It's as simple as that.
Capitalist society is built on, the use of petroleum byproducts. Like, most people don't realise that. Especially in like a country like the UK, like almost everything has somehow kind of come into contact with the oil and gas industry at some point along the line.
Taking it from where we are just now, oil and gas, do we stop it? No, we don't stop it. We manage the depletion of it so that we're not moving our carbon footprint.
For me, like just having conversations with people at work, there's certainly a sense of like concern about what direction the transition might go in.
Trying to get workers from what is a finite industry, as oil and gas depletes, into an infinite industry in wind.
It's doubling the costs of your training.
The barriers that they put up are such that to go from an oil and gas installation to a wind turbine, you've got to go and do the whole lot again, because we don't recognise what you've done with oil and gas. Why not?
I'm enjoying the renewables at the minute. It's really, really good. Now, obviously, with the transition I've made from oil and gas to the renewable sector, it's costing us around about £7,000 every 2 years to do my job. You're doing the same job offshore as what you would do on a wind turbine, so the job's not changing, because if you're a plater, you're a pipe fitter, these costs all build up. So people are just like, they're not interested, Most of the guys just aren't interested in making the transition because it's costing. And somebody needs to look into it and see how enough's enough, yeah. He's having a laugh with these lads,
I went to sea when I was 19 years old. It was like a really interesting time to like kind of see what the world's like outside of like, little old Grimsby. My great-great-grandfather John, he worked up from like an apprentice codman to trawler skipper. The pay was, at the time, considered to be very good, and if you stuck at fishing for maybe 10-15 years, you'd be able to set yourself up to have a house built and provide for your family. When the industry declined, a lot of the fish operators just weren't able to continue the business anymore, so they just had to close down, and when that happened, the community really felt that. As the transition starts to take shape and the companies start to talk about how by 2050 they might, for instance, be carbon neutral, like how that'll affect their livelihoods. For me, coming from a fishing town that's already kind of seen that happen, I've seen what it looks like 30, 40 years after the industry's declined, and the place feels forgotten about. Places that depend on that industry, Aberdeen for example, that's got that industry built solely for the purpose of operating like the oil and gas sector. If that all shuts down and nothing replaces it, that's like thousands of jobs.
This is a hub of skills and innovation technology. This should be the green hub for the UK.
The offshore workforce, it's the most vulnerable workforce in the country because they just haven't got a voice at all. You know, like, I mean, I've been trying to get guys together to sort of listen to people's different side of things, you know. Like, at the start of last year, all the guys were on board. They're like, oh, I definitely, Paul will, you know, they were all wanting a piece of it. And then once the pandemic sort of like slide a bit and oil rigs start putting their projects back on, nobody's interested. I'm like, well, what happens next year? You're going to be in the same situation as you were at the start of the year. Just because you're working now doesn't change the standards of offshore, does it? Some of the guys are lucky because they're core crew members and they get that training paid for, where I've always been a contractor. Because I'm ad hoc and he's core crew, if I've got a problem, he's not going to put his job at jeopardy, is he? You know, I'm the same. If he's got a problem, I'm like, well, you know. So they've divided the workforce down the middle. We're battling against each other before we start.
The world's worst oil field disaster, 164 dead. The men who escaped from a shattered platform and a burning sea. The cause, the gas leak that blew Piper Alpha apart.
The realisation of the potential for disaster was Piper. When you see the images of an installation destroyed, that's a pretty powerful message, you know what I mean? And that resonated through the entire offshore population to such an extent that the grassroots resistance, if you like, began. We'd all had fires, we'd all had explosions, we'd all seen guys killed, you know, ones and twos. But nobody had ever encountered this on the scale. Piper it encapsulated everything that was wrong with the industry. You had an oppressed, cowed workforce who were frightened to challenge. You had a platform operating to the extremes, you know, produced 100,000 barrels a day, but they wanted more. Somebody de-isolated a pump, turned the pump on and pushed a lot of gas through a pipeline that should never have been used. The flange blew off, created a spark, the spark lit this natural gas which was piping in. They were in the accommodation block and should have and could have been saved, but again it just shows you the whole attitude, culture. You've got another couple of installations in the area, the Tartan and the Claymore, sisters linked to the Piper through all the pipelines, and they're looking over at a huge fire and they're hearing the calls, the Mayday calls from the Piper and the disaster calls. And they never shut down. They continued to produce oil and gas and pump it into the pipeline. And that came out the only place it could, which was Piper. So they fueled the explosion and it changed the whole way in which we worked.
I mean, I've been in situations where they've had gas leaks twice the size of what blew the Piper Alpha up. And because I opened my mouth and said something, why have you got a rigger undoing a valve when he doesn't know where the isolation points are? All it needed was an ignition source and the whole platform would have blew up. But because I opened my mouth about a safety critical situation, I got not required back. I mean, really, this is people's lives, you know what I mean? There's 164 men on board.
If you don't comply, you go. You're off. You are not required back. There's a big not required back. You can call it a blacklist, call it whatever you will, but you're not going back.
Workers face a higher risk in the North Sea than anywhere else in the world. And it goes on to say that workers in the North Sea and 1.5 times likely to have a confrontation or get maimed, injured, or even end in a loss of life than anywhere else in the world.
So the thousands of workers like me working on the most dangerous environment you could imagine didn't have trade unions. So we created our own union. We stopped work, we sat in, we shut the North Sea down for 2 summers in a row. It gave us this freedom, if you like. Because you had a voice, because you were empowered to some extent, you had a degree of protection now. To enable workers to get organised like that, they've got to believe that government has got their back in terms of the regulators, that the unions have got their back, and that the industry is going to have to comply and support them. That's what happened after Piper, that's what we did when everything was against us. And everything currently is against these workers getting organised.
I'm going to sort of push it to stay in renewables, you know. So I'm going to look at courses to sort of stay on these turbines. My daughter's boyfriend there, he's only a young lad, and he's just, in fact, he starts today. He's doing his blade repair, his rope access, and his GWO.
Good. A bit tiring, but excited for the week.
To me, it's all linked. You know, this whole collaborative piece, if thought through and managed, why not start manufacturing? Why not? Why have we not built a turbine?
I mean, you could open the yard, they could train, they could have apprenticeships like what I've done. They could train these young lads up. And it would regenerate my whole area. It's in the full community, because everybody I know is a tradesman.
I mean, I'm constantly thinking about what the world's going to look like in 20, 30 years and how that's going to affect me in terms of a career. And I think I'd be stupid not to be thinking about how I might make a transition into clean energy. If there's some kind of system that can be brought in to assist in retraining people, I think it's going to make the transition a lot easier, you know. But there needs to be something.
I've been there in this industry for 25 years, and I could advise them and say, well, why, you know, this and that, but they don't want to know. They don't want to listen to working man, do they?
The transition needs to happen. Like, we do need to migrate from oil and gas to cleaner energy. That's it's quite obvious that we are doing damage to the planet. It also needs to be done so that the infrastructure around it is also built on cleaner energy. It's not just like oil and gas being used to make a clean energy, and then the clean energy is not quite as clean as you might think it is.
Obviously, I mean, I think it's 2030. They're looking at something like 70% of Britain's got to be run by renewable energy by 2030. If you start something, you've got to keep it up, haven't you?
Because this is it. This is the last game to make sure that we are a nation manufacturing and managing our natural resources for infinity.